Hello and welcome to A Daily Burn. I'm your host, Eric Miller. Today I'm joined by an awesome progressive from the great state of Texas. I'm not a progressive Democrat. I want to ask you about your sort of naming, but you're running for City Council for Denton, Texas, District 4, and we'll talk about all that. I'll ask you to brag about your district and so forth. Alison Maguire, how you doing, Alison?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you, Eric.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I think I discovered your campaign, when you're a Bernie supporter, in 2016, 2020, added a lot of Bernie friends. And I saw your campaign through a friend. I think maybe Priscilla is her name.
Yeah, Priscilla, yeah,
And I,
yeah.
yeah, and I know she's fantastic. And so I was like, oh, let me look into Allison's campaign. So, like I said, you're running for City Council in Denton. Before I get too much further, AllisonForDenton.com, grassroots campaign. You don't take giant corporate PAC money, correct? Right. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
right, cool. So I'll pull up your website and so forth. But kind of starting back to the beginning, what animated you politically, and then what inspired you to run for this seat?
Yeah, so helping the community, serving the community has always been a value that I was raised with and that I've held dear. I was a teacher for many years because I think, like a lot of teachers, I got into it because I wanted to serve the community. I wanted to improve my students' lives through education. And I'm still really passionate about education, public education especially. I still very much believe in it. But I also found myself frustrated a lot because my students were encountering obstacles that I didn't feel like I could solve from inside the classroom. So, for example, issues like housing instability. Some of my students were getting evicted from their homes, and they can't focus on learning when something like that is happening in their lives. So about a year and a half ago, I left the classroom to be a stay-at-home mom to my two toddlers. While, of course, caring for two little ones is very labor intensive, I also had a little bit more free time. And I thought, what do I want to do with this free time? And it was late 2019 and Bernie's campaign was getting going. And I was like, this is something that I believe in. I think that Medicare for all and canceling student loan debt and all of these other progressive policies are things that would meaningfully and immediately change the lives of my students and their families and everyone in my community. So I really got involved in just volunteering for the Bernie campaign, did a lot of canvassing, spent a lot of time on our college campuses. We have two universities here in Denton, University of North Texas and Texas Women's University. We also have North Central Texas College as well. And I just found it so fulfilling. I loved that voter outreach, especially with young people who, maybe hadn't voted before. I got like a rush out of, registering new voters and helping them find their polling places and navigate the ID laws, because of course Texas makes it very difficult to vote, and young people really need a lot of help sometimes knowing all the ins and outs of it. So I helped out with Bernie's campaign, and then after Super Tuesday, when we all had our hearts broken, I kind of was looking for other outlets, and I just felt really drawn to local politics. I felt like that was an area where I could make a lot of impact really immediately. And so I volunteered on some local campaigns and some state campaigns. And as the November cycle drew to a close, I began looking ahead to, what campaigns could I volunteer on next? And I began thinking about city council, and I was like, I don't think there's anybody running against our conservative incumbent city council member.
Right.
Maybe it could be me.
Yeah.
And I kind of got talked into it. And so I just dove in head first, even though my only previous engagement with politics has been just as a volunteer, just knocking doors and making phone calls. But I thought I'd just go for it. And here I am.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a few questions I want to, not me, us, right? You're the embodiment of it, right? That's great. I want to, you talk about canvassing and how that really like inspired you. That doesn't, you know, it's really a feeling when you knock on somebody's door and you are faced, I mean, pre-COVID and whatever, but when you really can engage somebody and ask them what their concerns are, and you can actually hear, not just hear them, but listen to them and absorb them. And like in Bernie's case, you have these are the right answers, right? And that you're principled in like what you're canvassing on, right? The platform that you're canvassing on, right? Can you just talk about that feeling? Like, it's one of those things, like we need to really get more people knocking on doors and so forth. Can you talk about that feeling, that experience of canvassing successfully? And, maybe even if you have an anecdote of somebody that you flipped or inspired, to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking with especially young people on college campuses, I would, approach them and say, are you registered to vote at your current address? And I would help them confirm that and make sure they have proper ID and everything. And then I would say, what are the issues that matter to you?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they would say, oh, I don't know, I don't follow politics that closely. And I'd say, well, are you taking out student loans to be here right now?
Right. Yeah.
Do you have health care? Does your family have health care? And once I started digging in, they started realizing, oh no, I found that they had been taking for granted all of these forces in their lives that were making things more difficult for them, like student loan debt and medical debt. And when I was able to say, it doesn't have to be that way. There are policies that could make a difference for you and your family financially. It was very exciting to make them to see them realize that that there are sometimes political solutions to personal problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm sure you're carrying that into your campaign, those lessons learned, those outreach efforts and so forth. Before I get too much further on your platform and so forth, I want to pull up your website again. It's AlisonForDenton.com. This is a grassroots campaign. And as I've been kind of saying with with all these amazing candidates that I've been featuring, if things didn't begin and end with Donald Trump, right? If you were motivated politically, by the last president, stay engaged, right? These policies, that, like Alison just said, they affect our lives, right? So stay engaged. Like campaigns like this, could use our energy. And I don't know I didn't look at the numbers on yours, but some campaigns can be just a dozen or more votes, 100 votes, right? Can make a swing, make a huge difference. So it's AlisonForDenton.com. You can donate there. You have mechanisms for people to volunteer, I assume?
Yes. Yeah. There's a tab at the top. You can click volunteer and that'll take you to a Google form. Very, very, very DIY. This whole thing is just a Google site that I threw together because I have no web design experience or expertise.
That's great, though. That's great. So early voting, as you can see, is April 19th, 27th. Election day is May 1st. You mentioned the incumbent is a Republican. Can you talk about, talk about how terrible he is, if you would?
Well, okay. So first of all, let me say that municipal elections in most cities in Texas, but including Denton, are nonpartisan. So I'm not running as a Democrat, and my opponent is not running as a Republican. That being said, my opponent is an outspoken Trump supporter. He is also a real estate developer who has consistently voted in the interest of people and organizations that are making money off of real estate and development. We're a very rapidly growing city. And we have huge amounts of infrastructure projects on the horizon, and tons of new building. And the direction that it's taking, due in part to the way that the incumbent has voted in the past, is big detached single family homes that are so expensive that the average Dentonite cannot afford them.
Mm.
And that's just not what is going to benefit our community. So I really want to take a different approach. I have no ties to the real estate industry. The only property I own is the home that I live in. And I'm interested in responsible, thoughtful development that will provide a wide range of housing options across the price scale, but especially at those lower price points, because people are getting priced out of their homes.
Right.
We have a very large, I think 52% of the people in our city rent, and rents just keep climbing higher and higher and higher. And I think that the solution to that is more affordable development, and development that is dense, so that we can make our neighborhoods walkable and bikeable, and allow Dentonites to not own a car if they don't want to own a car, or if they can't afford to own a car.
Right. So I'm going to just take a wild guess that he does have ties to these real estate development and lobbyists and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, he has taken money from real estate PACs in the past, and yeah, and is unapologetic about his support for
Right.
real estate interests. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you deliver that message, right? If you're a resident of Denton, a Dentonite, if I may use the vernacular, and you hit them with that message, do they get that? Does that resonate? Do they do they understand that? Do they feel that?
Oh, yes. Every Dentonite, whether they're a renter or a homeowner, is feeling the impact of what's happening in our housing market right now.
Hmm.
Whether it's renters whose rent just keeps going up and up and up every year, even in the midst of a pandemic, or homeowners whose property taxes keep climbing higher and higher because their property valuation keeps rising. It's impacting all of us, and we're the growth in the market and the rising cost of housing is really approaching the point where it's like a bubble, that I think we're all a little bit scared is going to pop in the way it did in 2008.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to be really careful and really mindful about how we develop going forward in order to keep the market stable.
Right. Right. And that would extend into small businesses, I assume, hard hit by COVID. I think I was looking at some recent news stories on Denton. There's a drive-through vaccination site, which just got set up or whatever. Can you talk about, I guess, small business recovery, what you would hope to do on city council,
Mhm.
and tie it to the impacts of COVID that you're feeling in your city?
Yeah. So we have a lot of small businesses in Denton. Denton is such a great town. I love it here. I say I wasn't born here, but I got here as fast as I could, and I've really loved being able to adopt it as my hometown. And it has such a charm and such a sense of community, for a lot of reasons. We have a really vibrant arts and music scene here, and we also have a lot of small businesses that operate as third spaces. There are a lot of pre-COVID. There were a lot of places to go in Denton to hang out and get a cup of coffee and run into people that you know, and those small businesses are struggling so much, and there are obviously there are resources. There's the Paycheck Protection Program, and there are these disaster loans and everything. But I feel like the city could be coming up with more tangible support for our small businesses, to help them stay afloat beyond just directing them to federal resources, which is our current tack. I will say, speaking of our vaccination clinic, the Denton County Public Health Department has been doing an outstanding job. And as you alluded to, they opened up a drive-through COVID vaccine clinic at the Texas Motor Speedway.
Right.
And if close your eyes and picture what you imagine that the Texas Motor Speedway to look
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
multiply it by 10, it's massive.
Right.
And they, I want to say on Tuesday, they vaccinated like 9,000 people there. And they're looking to even make that number go higher in the coming weeks. So they are doing an incredibly efficient job of getting folks vaccinated, which has given me so much hope for things getting back to normal, whatever that looks like soon. But I've been really incredibly impressed by our county health department's vaccination.
Excellent. Well, that's heartening to hear. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned about biking and maybe you don't need a car. So, let me just kind of throw out a few topics, right? That sounds like you support sort of green public transportation. Can you talk about that if that's in your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So Denton is part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And the Metroplex is designed with cars in mind. This is it's very, very difficult to get around if you don't have a car. And that's by design. I think that there have been some community leaders in the past who have wanted to conceive of Denton as like a bedroom community, where people live in detached single family homes and then they drive to Dallas for work and then they drive back. But that's not what Denton is. And we are becoming more and more urban. And as we become more and more urban and larger, our streets can't handle the traffic that is coming here. And we need to and will expand roadways. I know Dentonites are like, are we going to get more? When are we going to get more lanes on Teasley Lane? Like, when are we going to expand the road that I use the most? Because that's very much needed. But as we do that, we have to have an eye toward the future, where we're just going to reach capacity with cars. We're not going to be able to support any more cars on our roads. So we have to start now making it convenient for people to walk and bike and use public transportation. We need sidewalk connectivity. I like to say I live a quarter mile from a grocery store, and I can't walk there unless I'm willing to like wade through a muddy ditch because sidewalks. So sidewalk connectivity is going to be a huge part of that. Protected bike lanes, building up the infrastructure around our public transportation system. We do have a public transportation system that's run by the county, but the city can do more to make it accessible and usable for Denton residents.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, thanks for bringing it to that sidewalk level. We were talking about the incumbent and his real estate ties, connections, right? We're all animated by politics, by Bernie, by whatever, right? There again, just to reiterate, like Alison, she's talking about building sidewalks. She's not talking about, building, whatever crazy real estate and, making her donors richer, right? So, if you're in Denton, if you're in Texas, wherever you are, like we need Alisons in these seats to be working for us, right? Literally at the street level, the sidewalk level. So I'm glad you highlighted that as an example. And again, I'll just say it, it's AlisonForDenton.com. On races like this, even the smallest donation goes a long way, and the earlier you donate in a campaign, the more impact it has. So, if you have $10, $20, send that Alison's way, please, AlisonForDenton.com. And if you don't share this video, offer to donate, right? Like her socials. There's a million ways to spread the word, right? Even if you don't live in Denton, if you know somebody in Texas, they know somebody that does, right? So spread the word. And that's why I have, amazing folks like Alison on. You mentioned you work on some statewide campaigns in Texas. Boy, in that cycle, there was like Julie Oliver, Mike Siegel. There were these really amazing progressives that just like,
Mhm.
just,
Oh yeah.
Beto O'Rourke in 2016 was that? Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
2018, right?
Mhm.
Can you talk about, what's, I guess, what's the makeup of the current city council? And, there's all the talk of Texas turning blue and there's momentum that way and stuff. Can you talk about just the horse race aspects of it?
Yeah, I mean, Denton is really a microcosm of Texas politics in general. Everybody thinks of Texas as being just this Republican stronghold and deep, deep red. But the truth is that it's Republicans have a pretty small majority. Um,
Mm,
that is true in Denton, and that is true in my district. And I would even go so far as to say that I think even that majority is a little bit of a mirage that has been created by voter suppression tactics and
mm,
low voter turnout. In my district in particular, we typically in local races, we get turnouts that are less than 10% of registered voters in
right.
our municipal races. And because of that, the district looks pretty conservative on paper. But if we can get, folks who have come out to vote um, for progressives in state and national level elections, if we can get those folks to turn out for a municipal race, I mean, then this district would flip right away.
Mm.
Um,
So
and
how do you do that? That's the magic. That's the trick. So how do you do that, right?
Well, I mean, there's no secret beyond just elbow grease. We gotta reach those voters. Right now, we're going to be really focused on mailers and phone calls. Since our county is doing such an outstanding job of vaccinating large numbers of people, I'm very hopeful that come March and April we can start knocking on doors and feel safe doing that. So I mean, yeah, that's just all there is to it, especially in a small race like this. Got to get one vote at a time, talk to one
Yeah.
voter at a time, and really do that outreach.
That's great. And you mentioned phone calls, so I'll be a shill again. I have no shame about it. You can make calls from anywhere around the country, sign up for a shift and, just make some phone calls. Like, again, it didn't begin and end with Trump. We need people like Allison in city councils around the country. Kind of going back a little bit, just policy wise, you mentioned you were an educator formerly, and, I'm sure you went through, one thing that I think needs to be centered more is, the trauma we inflict on our kids with active shooter drills, right? And what that's going to look like
Mhm.
for generations to come. To me, that's horrific and shameful. Can you talk about, maybe your experience with that firsthand? Did you have to go through those as an educator? And what's
Oh, oh yes, absolutely, yeah. And I think of it a little bit like what's the term? Security theater. Like
mm,
putting on a show that we are doing something and we are preparing to try and make everybody feel like we're protected. Um, but it's teaching kids to hide in a corner is not adequate when it comes to protecting our schools. Um, and I do think that common sense gun laws, background checks, prohibiting people who've been convicted of domestic violence from owning guns, things like that. I think that those are very reasonable steps. But I think that we also just need to take a wide view of violence in our culture and the way that schools function, both in relation to violence and just in general.
mm.
Um, I,
How so? How do you mean? Can you go into that a little
um,
more?
sorry, this is just such a complex issue.
Yeah, yeah.
I just feel like neoliberal education policies, like an intense focus on high stakes standardized testing, for example, has created an environment where teachers are forced to focus on these test scores and
Right.
forced to teach to the test, even if that's not what they want to be doing. And it creates just this pressure cooker scenario where the kids are incredibly stressed out, they're angry, they're acting out, because it's not an environment that communicates care to them.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, compounded by what you said earlier about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're not being met at this level in terms of home and food security and so forth, right? Uh, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I could talk to you all day. Just any other, like, what are some other frontline? One of my questions I always ask is brag on your city, and you did it without me asking. So I get that's off my list.
yeah,
Which
I can't
I
help
love.
it. Denton is just wonderful.
I love
The
it.
first couple years that I lived here, I worked far away and I had a long commute and I was working long hours. And like, on the rare weekend when I would get to go out Dentoning, it was like, oh, it was such a balm to my soul. Like I missed the city even when I was new to it, because it's the kind of town that makes you fall in love with it right away. Because
That's great.
there's such a sense of community here.
That's great. How about other like frontline issues in Denton that you wanna highlight? What else do you want to cover?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've environmental issues are huge here. We for folks who are not local and don't remember in 2014, we passed a referendum banning fracking, hydraulic fracturing within our city limits.
Hmm.
And just a few months later, the state legislature passed HB 40, essentially banning municipalities from banning fracking.
Wow.
So that was really a big blow, but it also, established that the people of Denton care very much about environmental issues. We don't want gas wells in our city. We don't want to be breathing in, the chemicals that are given off by these gas wells. And we don't want to be dependent on fossil fuels. Our city has made really great strides toward getting our electricity from 100% renewable sources. We have a publicly owned electric utility here.
Oh, great.
Offers amazing opportunities for democratic control over our greenhouse gas emissions. There's been sort of progress has been made in the direction of 100% renewable energy, but we're not all the way there. We haven't met the benchmarks that we set for ourselves in recent years. So I would love to see a little bit those goals pursued a little bit more aggressively to ensure that we truly are 100% renewable. And I'd like to see us exploring all the avenues that we can explore in light of the states taking away of our home rule. Exploring all the options we can as far as gas well setbacks, requiring more distance between gas wells and homes, schools, and hospitals and parks.
Right on. Are there any? Yeah, that's fantastic. Are there any? I always imagine in Texas, there's tons of the footprint of fossil fuels has to be massive, right? Are there any like super fun sites or anything like that within your city that you're aware of that are problems that that never get fully addressed? Aside from looking forward, cleaning up, remediating what has been faulty heretofore. Is there anything like that in Denton that you're aware of?
We don't have any super fun sites in Denton. There is one at least one in Dallas that I know of. We are in the process of decommissioning an old coal burning power plant, which has been kind of a mixed bag, but it is getting decommissioned and it is going to be remediated. But yeah, within the Denton city limits, if you're talking about oil and gas, you're talking about fracking and natural gas. That's what's here. And we have a lot of gas wells. A lot of gas wells.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's obviously a huge issue. And I'm guessing the city council is is there any fossil fuel money in play on the city council? as you're aware?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, I will say that, you know, obviously we get a lot of tax revenue from the oil and gas industry. And that's something that we're going to have to address because we, you know, setting aside even the environmental issues, oil and gas is a boom and bust industry. We're booming right now, but a bust is coming because that's just how it works. And we need to make sure that we're not financially dependent on something that, you know, where the price of oil could crash and then our city would be bankrupt. Right. We need to be moving our tax revenue away from that.
Right. And just because it's the right thing to do, right? Environmentally, you know, which is a bonus, right? Yeah. It's not just financially viable and wise, it's, you know, environmentally. So again, it's AlisonForDenton.com is her website. Please make a donation, share this video, like and share her socials, follow her. If you know anybody in Denton or if you're in Denton, you know, the election, early voting is April 19th to 27th. Election day is May 1st. You know, so make sure you get involved, donate, offer a phone bank. You know, there's a million ways you can help. We need to get people like Alison elected. You know, before we go, let me ask you, you know, as a first-time candidate, and I like what inspired you. You know, you're, I don't know how many months in, but you know, what have you learned? What's been surprising? You know, what do you want to share about, you know, your first run for city council?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm really early into it. I'm basically like one month into it.
Okay.
And there's so much to learn. I feel like, I mean, I am in grad school, but I feel like this is grad school. Like, I feel like I'm having to read and read and read and read to try and understand the complexities of all of our ordinances. And, but you know, it's worth it. And I guess what I would say is if you're somebody who's thinking about running for office and you think, well, you know, I'm not a lawyer, or, you know, I haven't worked in the oil and gas industry. And, you know, my background is in the arts and humanities, but if you're willing to do some reading, you know, you can gain the skills necessary to do this. Because that's what I'm doing right now.
Amazing. Yeah, and thank you for doing so. It's, you know, AOC, famously a bartender, Corey Bush, you know, an activist, Jamal Bowman, a principal. Like these, you know, we need, you know, regular sort of working class folks. Not everyone has to be a lawyer to run for office, right? They make it, you know, they make it prohibitive, you know, if you're working class and trying to run a campaign. So like you said, you're blessed that you have a little bit of free time, such as it is with you know, your kids, right? But you know, they make it prohibitive. But you know,
if I were still teaching, I would not be able to run.
Yeah, and that's by design. That's not accidental. So, you know, thank you for running and, you know, and doing so. And, you know, Godspeed on the campaign. Again, April 19th to 27th is the primary, early voting rather. May 1st is the election day. AlisonForDenton.com. Like, share, donate, volunteer. And then, you know, come back when I can call you Councilperson Maguire without a C, MAG, right? So, right. So yeah, it's been a real treat chatting with you. Anything that we didn't hit on that you want to talk about, or any closing comments?
I don't believe so. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate the time.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night. Thanks all.
You too. Bye.